Let's get started. Welcome to Making the Most of Group Story Time. I'm Jeff Johnson. On behalf of Explorations in Early Learning and Inspired EC, I'd like to welcome you. A little bit about Josie, our featured speaker tonight. I've known Josie for years now. We met via the internet, and then we ended up, luckily enough, being able to hang out at a bunch of different trainings and places. She spends some time hanging out at my place, working on projects with us, and she's a delight. She's a former elementary teacher. She spent many years working in early learning settings. She is a full-time mom. She is a full-time wife. She is a full-time children's librarian. She is a regular guest on the Child Care Bar and Grill podcast. She creates content for the Playvolution HQ website that I run, and she's all around delightful. And Josie, you're going to need to unmute yourself in a minute. The other great thing about Josie is that one of the most humorous things I've observed in the last 5 years of my life happened when Josie was telling a story and tipped over in a chair in my living room. And I just about had a stroke. I laughed so hard. It was delightful. So Josie, how's that for an introduction?
Well, thank you. There goes all my credibility. God, I wish I could remember what that story was about, but I sure can't. But that was a fun night.
Well, that means it was a fun night. So the topic is group story time, and we can sit around for hours telling stories. But let's focus on this topic instead. So where should we jump in?
All right. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, and thanks for joining us. I'm really excited to talk about this. This is my topic. I'm very passionate about it. But before we start talking about how to really make group story times work, I want to talk a little bit about why do them and what do they look like, and just some terminology that will help kind of some of my other ideas make sense.
Great.
So why? Well, basically because we are trying to make lifelong readers. You may not love reading as an adult, but you need to do it. No matter what your career is, there's going to be reading involved. That's just part of being a human. And we can set the stage for it and try to make it as positive as possible when they are little. So young children who have consistent, good experiences with books and reading, studies have shown that they are more likely to be lifelong readers. But more importantly, when they see the adults in their life reading, and when they read together, they learn that it's an important thing to do and hopefully a fun thing to do. And when they're ready, they'll be more motivated to do it.
So I'm going to jump in with a question right here. During story time with kids in a early learning setting, I mean, like a lot of other things in early learning, when it comes to stories and literacy, mood matters, right? If a child is listening to a story by a teacher who feels put out and doesn't enjoy the process and is anxious about their story reading abilities and those kind of things, that kind of radiates out into the kids and impacts their relationship with the story and the experience, right?
Absolutely. I would argue that quality is far more important in being a defining factor than quantity. Granted, you want to have as many of these good experiences as possible, but good being the key word there. If you are unhappy and you are bored, well, then you're not going to have a very engaged audience, and story time is going to be something they dread versus something they really look forward to. So you want to read to them early and often, but it's not enough just to expose them to the books. You want to make sure these experiences are enjoyable, fun, something they want to come back to again and again and again. Did that answer your question?
That answers my question. I'm sorry. Yes, thank you.
So along with that, you need to think of these experiences as a partnership. They really need to be relationship based. You as the adult are not performing or entertaining the kids. Now, granted, your story time might be entertaining, but for it to really be a quality experience, you need to be doing some shared reading. So if you're unfamiliar with the term shared reading, it's just a fancy term for story time as a group where the adult and the child or children are looking at the book together and they're interacting. It's a back and forth conversation. So it's not just the adult reading, sitting there with the book, reading word for word and ignoring what's going on in the room. The kids need to be engaged. So you're going to want to do a lot of what they call dialogic reading. And if you're unfamiliar with that term, that's just you're asking the kids questions or you're having conversations while you read. And it's not just things like, what color is the ball? You want to think beyond things that they can answer themselves. And you want to kind of try to promote a little bit of a higher level conversation. Things like, what do you see? What do you see going on in the pictures? Because a lot of times the picture or the illustration of a picture book is going to maybe tell a slightly different story than what the text is actually saying. Or, you want to try to get them involved by connecting it to their own lives, their own experiences. Oh, that character's feeling sad. What do you do when you're feeling sad? So when you're having this shared reading experience, you want to keep the conversation going. You should think of yourself as the partner or the mentor and not the storytime boss. That child's participation is just as important, if not more.
So in my experience, this is hard for a lot of caregivers because a lot of times they feel very task oriented. I've got to get these 3 books done before rest time, that kind of thing. And so allowing themselves to go off text and have those conversations and answer those questions and ask questions is something a lot of caregivers struggle with, huh?
Yeah. And I mean, because it can be kind of scary to relinquish a little bit of that control because you don't know what's going to happen once you give it over to a group of 3-year-olds. And I mean, there are a lot of tips and tricks you can use, but I think the key thing to remember is that as hard as it is, you've got to kind of let the kids lead these experiences. It's okay if you don't finish the book. It's okay. I know, shocking. It's okay if you get off task, if the conversation you guys are having becomes so rich that it leads to something totally different. And honestly, sometimes, especially if you have a big group, they just may not be in the mood for it that day. So I want to make sure we really clarify that there's no one correct way for this to look. You're going to know your group, you're going to know what works best, and you're going to add your own tips and movement activities and songs, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But it gets to look like you want it to look and what the kids want it to look like. And it's okay. It's okay if you don't finish the story, if you don't read every page. The book police aren't going to come and get you.
Well, are there book police?
Yes.
That's scary. So we've been in this series we've been talking a lot about play, rough and tumble play, and things like sharing. And one theme that has come up just about in every session is the idea of being able to relinquish more power and control of the experience to the children, because we as humans all like to feel powerful and in control in our lives. And so what you're saying is in story times, even in those group experiences, giving up some of that teacher power and control to the kids makes for a better experience.
Absolutely it will, because you're going to have a more engaged audience. It's kind of hard to do when, you have your plan, but I like to try to think of story time. And when I was in an early childhood classroom, I like to try to think of it get outside of that circle time bubble and let the kids really initiate the story time. You might have a book you want to share for the day, and there's nothing wrong with that. But a lot of times I would try to wait for one child to bring me a book. And I would find if I sat on the floor and started reading to that one child, the next thing I know, I turn around and I have 10 more that have made their own little circle to listen to the book too. So, I mean, when you let the kids take control, the entire conversation is going to be richer. Now, is it okay to have your favorites where you've maybe put out some books that you've already kind of thought about, hey, this might lead to some really good discussions about whatever. Sure, because one of the skills we want kids to, we can talk more about the skills that kids gain during story time, but one of them is to add to their background knowledge. And a great way to do that, to learn about new things, is through books. So you might come in with some preconceived ideas, but it's always good to be willing to let the direction the kids want to go, take over when naturally it happens.
Yeah, giving up that power. I should have. I put this in the chat before we got started, but I should have said it at the beginning. If anybody's got questions, you're more than welcome to chime in via voice whenever you want to. But you can also pop things in the chat, and I'll relay them to Josie while we're going through this. Josie, I know one that's going to come up because it always does. Is if you are in a classroom of 8 preschoolers or 6 toddlers or whatever your group size is, and it's story time, does that mean it's story time for everybody? Story time is mandatory? What's that look like if Johnny or Karen don't want to engage in the I'm sure obviously perfectly read story that you're going to share?
Yeah, this is going to be my number one tip always for any story time, and it doesn't matter if you've got just one child sitting with you or a classroom. Movement is okay. It is 100% unrealistic to expect a group of 10 kids to all be sitting crisscross on the carpet, hands in their lap, totally 100% engaged in a story. If that's what you're expecting, you are going to be so disappointed. When I do my story times at the library, I can have close to 50 kids in a room. And if I waited for every single one to be doing that, we would just never have the story. So movement is okay. And honestly, I have found many times that the child that is sitting over in the corner playing with blocks is the one, when you ask a question, that will be the first to respond. They're often listening the best. But I think to help with that, there are lots of things you can do. The main one being find ways for kids to move while you're reading the book, and maybe in between stories. The book itself is often the least important component of a good story time session. It is, a lot comes from the book, but once again, it's those conversations you're having. And it's also the other ways you are finding kids to get engaged. I use a lot of music while I'm reading books. Almost any book can become a song if you try hard enough. I try to find, we'll do shakers, we'll do hand clapping. If we're talking about rhyme and rhythm, we might try to clap out the rhythms. One thing I like to do to help with engagement and to let them move naturally during the story is find little manipulatives that kind of go along with the book. For example, and here I will probably try to share the screen if I can do that. This book right here is one of my favorites. Let me see. Did I take over? Can you guys see that?
Yep, we got it.
Okay. It is called Go Fish by Tammy. I think you pronounce her last name Sower. I'm not really sure exactly. But this book has a lot of really simple text. In fact, I think until the very end, it just says go fish or no fish over and over again. And what I like to do with this is I will give kids a piece of ribbon or streamer or string, and we'll talk about how it's our fishing pole. And so every time the characters say, go fish, everyone takes that ribbon in their hand and they lean back and they toss their reel toss their line forward. And then they'll pretend to reel it in, and they all fish along with the characters in the book. So I like to have just a bunch of junk close by. So when it makes sense to pull a manipulative into the story, that's just one natural way to have a lot of engagement. It's not Dr. Seuss. It's, let me see if I can find it. There we go. Can you see that hand, fingers, thumb?
Oh, that's a great book.
Yeah, it's a classic. This book I like to have, and I have a little bongo drum that I use in story time, but you don't even have to. Everybody can just do it on the floor. tapping out that rhythm while you read in a really, I mean, it's in a really natural, it has a natural sing-song rhythm to it already. Just any little trick you can do to keep kids moving throughout the story, you're going to, I mean, you're just going to have better engagement. And along with that, another little trick, long wordy books are not good group story time books. That's fine if you've got just one or two kids sitting on your lap where you can really take your time going through a story. But if you're trying to engage a classroom or a larger group, you want to stick to books that have short, snappy text. Otherwise, you'll lose them.
Well, and for most younger kids, especially, that short, snappy text usually means a lot of alliteration and a lot of rhymes, and there's a lot of value in those types of language in the early years, huh?
Yes, absolutely. Do you guys want to talk a little bit about some of the skills that you might get or that kind of go along with that, the skills that you can promote while you're doing this? Okay. My caveat with all of these is, once again, with shared reading, this is not direct instruction. You're not going to stop in the middle of the book and say, and this is learning about print awareness, because that means absolutely nothing to a 4-year-old. These are just terms that it's good for you to know, that you can kind of maybe scaffold while you're reading. You can add, maybe kind of direct some of the questions to cover these skills, but you're not going to address them directly with the kids. So the first one is the one I just said, print conventions and awareness. This is knowing that this is when a child understands that those letters on, or those squiggles on the page aren't just squiggles. They are words. They're print. It's print that has meaning. And it's also understanding how a book works. You know, if I am holding a book upside down, it's hard to read. So kids learn that you hold it where if this was a picture book, you were holding it where the pictures were facing up. It's a cultural thing, because most of us are going to be maybe tracing the text with our fingers, showing kids that we read from left to right. In other cultures, it would be the opposite. But you know, you do what makes sense with the students in your care. Sorry, I need a drink. It's also going to be things like, as the kids get a little bit older, you know, you might start the story by saying, this is Red Fish, Blue Fish by Dr. Seuss. They're going to learn what an author is, what an illustrator is. And so that's probably the easiest one to do, because you just kind of naturally do those things as you're reading. It's also going to be when, you know, you're driving in the car, I mean, with your own child, if you're driving in the car, or you're going on a field trip with your class, pointing out signs, text, you know, any kind of text, that's going to be more print awareness that you are giving to your students. The other one is, let's see, phonological awareness. Now that's the one that not everybody's familiar with, but it's really simple. We all know it. It is just the awareness that words have sounds, smaller sounds. So like the word book really has 3 sounds, book. And so for kids, when they start to pick up on this, that is important, because those are skills they're going to use to sound out words when they start to read independently. Now with little people, you know, you're not going to really focus on C-A-T, at, when you're reading. But what you might do is sing lots of songs where each syllable in the word is on a different note. And so the kids slowly start to develop this awareness that this word is made up of lots of different sounds. And along with that, you've got letter knowledge, which, you know, is exactly what it sounds like. It's knowing your letters, and that they make different sounds. And with the English language, that can be a pain, because the same letter can make a lot of different sounds. But you know, as you start to read, you can start to point out letters. We're not talking flashcards, but you know, what is a child's most important word?
The first letter of their name.
Well, that's their name. And so if you're reading a story and there's a big J on the cover, might be like, oh, Juliet, look, that's your letter. That's your J. That's just ways to teach some letter knowledge during story time. And then we've got vocabulary and background knowledge, and those two are really interrelated. Vocabulary, obviously, is just knowing what specific words mean. And you are doing that all the time when you're reading books. If you get to a word, what did I do the other day? It was the word furious. And we stopped and we talked about furious. What does furious mean? Oh, look at the picture. What does their face look? Oh, they're mad. You're right. They're mad. Furious is another word for mad. Those are the kinds of things you're going to be picking up as you're doing story time. And then background knowledge. Once again, books are a great way to add to that for kids, but you're also going to be drawing on what they already know as you're reading a book to kind of help them make sense of it. So those skills, when we could spend another 2 hours going into detail on those, we don't really need to. I do.
I got it. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So children, humans are wired for language. So we really don't have to spend a lot of time trying to teach these things to most children because they're wired to pick them up. And so it's those exchanges of language that are the important the important thing for most kids most of the time, right?
Exactly. And that's why I say the book is actually the least important part of the story time. It's those conversations, it's that talking that you're doing while you read that is really going to be helping them just soak up all that language that their brains are already sponges for.
And I was, because you sent me this list a couple days ago, the phonological awareness thing, really, I did some more reading on that. And one of the things that really struck me is there seems to be a direct correlation to children's abilities with phonological awareness in the early years and how they're going to be as readers when they get older. And so in the early years, when we are pumping them full, washing them in, when they're awash in language, it's really preparing them for the more formal learning to read and write and language skills when they get a little bit older.
Exactly. I would argue that isn't the main reason to do story time. The main reason to do story time is because everyone loves a good story.
Yeah.
And it's an enjoyable experience for both you and the children. But that is what we're doing every time we sit and we read a book with a child. And notice I say with a child, not to a child. You are getting them ready for those later reading experiences once they get into school. It's very interesting that you mentioned that about phonological awareness, because back in the day, everybody learned how to read mainly by sounding out words. And then in the 90s, we kind of got away from that into what we call whole language, where you weren't focusing on the phonics, you were focusing on sight words and learning the word as a whole. And what a lot of studies began to show was kids weren't learning how to read anymore. Those phonological and phonemic is just even smaller. It's like the actual letter sounds. Phonemic and phonological awareness, we're finding, is that specific to the US?
I think what might be, Bradley?
Oh, I'm sorry. The movement to whole language instruction for reading, I'm assuming.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah. And it might be, but this was a how we learn words. This was a big thing in the 90s, and what they found, and even in the early 2000s, they found that kids just weren't learning how to read because they didn't understand how those individual letter sounds were working. Sight words only take you so far. Eventually, you have to be able to sound out a word. Now, are there tricky words where the letters don't make the right sound? Yes, but schools have actually started moving back to that, to learning to read by phonics, because this skill is so important. So we're just, during story time, we're trying to build those connections early on to make learning how to read in kindergarten, first, second grade much easier.
Cool.
So
what's next?
Real quick, I'm going to steal the screen again. And let me pull it up. Can you see my 5 practices?
Yep.
Okay. This chart was created by a researcher named Saroj, I always say her last name wrong, Goting. And we can get you, I'm sure Jeff can share some of these resources with you. But this is just kind of a cool chart because it breaks down each of these early literacy components and gives you specific examples of how you can do each of them throughout a story time session. If you notice at the top, sing, talk, read, write, and play, that is the American Library Association's Every Child Ready to Read program. These are the skills that we are always specifically targeting in our story times, but I think most people do them naturally in the just all over the place when you're reading. I don't think it's necessary. I mean, we spell it out, but I don't think it is exclusive to the library system by any means. But if you just want to take a minute to kind of look through those.
I am going to paste that into the chat so you can have that document if you want it, people.
Yep, just for future reference. I thought this was just a pretty good chart. And I'm going to exit out. This is actually her website, earlylit.net, and this is where this comes from. She has some amazing resources if you want some specifics. Sorry, I'm scrolling down here. Just ways to talk about reading with families. This might be some really helpful information to give to the parents of the students you work with. Just ways that they can continue to support early literacy at home. I'm trying to think, I feel like she's got, oh yeah, down at the bottom, she's got several best books list. I mean, this is earlylit.net. It's just a good place to go if you want more information on each of these skills.
I just pasted a couple of those links that she's sharing into the chat too, if you would like those. And when we wrap up, I'll leave the session on for a little bit, so anybody that needs to scroll back to grab those can.
All right. Should make sure there's nothing there that we missed with that part. Did you have a question, Jeff?
Nope.
I thought also we could talk a little bit about what kinds of things. So now that you know why we do it, kind of what it looks like, just some different things you can add to your toolkits when you're doing story time and some specific resources that might be helpful to you. The biggest thing is obviously books, but think beyond picture books. Children love all sorts of different books, especially informational books. For some kids, those nonfiction books with the real pictures, that's really all they want to read. Those are much more, I mean, those kids that their brains are just wired for science. Informational books are kind of like the key to hooking them into reading because it has things like, how does the world work? Those questions, it answers those questions that they really want to know. So make sure you're trying to incorporate those into your story times. Now, a lot of them are very wordy, so you might not read an entire book, and that's okay. You might just kind of focus in on the pictures that the kids are most interested in. Other things to think about: poetry, nursery rhymes, chapter books. Even you don't have to read. You can just like read a specific chapter. You don't need to do the entire book or just like a snippet of that chapter even. But sometimes it's kind of nice to use a book without a picture and kind of force them to use their imagination just a little bit.
So Bradley's got in the comments here about pace, volume, and expression. What is it important to put some life into the stories when you're reading them, Josie?
Absolutely. because while I say you are not an entertainer, you are
You are totally an entertainer.
You are totally entertaining here. And I think that just goes without saying. Do you want to listen to someone read to you like this? Or do you want someone who is animated and is using voices for different characters? And you don't have to be good at it. You don't have to be someone who's going to get hired to do voiceovers on Cartoon Network. You don't have to be someone who's getting a record deal when it comes to singing. Kids just like animation. So just think, yeah, expression, volume, those are huge. Now your volume, you can have a lot of fun with that in a story time, because if your crowd is getting a little rowdy, all of a sudden you get quiet and you're like, oh, look what's going to happen next. You know, if you bring it down, that's one way to grab their attention. Or if something exciting is about to happen, they learn that those big words on the page can mean different emotions. Then that goes back to print conventions. If it's bold text, you're going to talk in a big, strong voice. If it's small text, you're going to talk about how maybe that's a whisper. Things like that.
And just that accent on those rhymes and that alliteration a little bit, those kind of things. I always found it was useful to practice first. I think we sometimes don't do that because I mean, we're all busy and life is hectic and that kind of stuff, but actually knowing the book that you're reading to children before you read it to children is, and it sounds like kind of a no-brainer, but I've seen plenty of people in the time I've spent visiting programs and working in them not know the book that they're sitting down to read the kids, and they find themselves stumbling through it, and that, I mean, it affects the performance, the experience, the interaction.
And that's a really good point. You know, I say, let it be child-led, but you can choose what books are in your classroom for the children to pick from. So if there's a book that you absolutely hate, don't have it as an option. Now, that being said, you know, if you read a book well, naturally your crew's going to want you to read it to them 500 times. And sometimes you just suck it up and read it 500 times, because those repeated readings are so important you know, for kids to learn the text and learn some of these things that we're talking about. That repetition really helps cement it. So you might get tired of the book, but they don't have to know that. You can still be entertaining.
I don't know about that. I could only read Brown Bear about 85 times in a row before my ears started noticeably bleeding. And it would get a little bit rough after that. The first 80 times were pretty easy, but I mean, we all have our limits, don't we?
Well, you have your limits, but have you ever tried singing Brown Bear to the tune of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star?
No. Would you demonstrate that?
Brown bear, what do you see? I see a red bird looking at me.
Oh, okay. You totally did it. Awesome.
I really did it. And it's, so that's just an idea. If it's a book that they want to hear over and over again, but it's driving you crazy, maybe there's a way you can mix it up a little bit. With Brown Bear, it got to the point where I would let my class do the work for me. I made little paper plates with the animals on them, and every time they wanted to read Brown Bear, I would just put the plates out on the floor and have like 5 of every animal, and it's okay if everybody wants to be the purple cat. And when it was time to do purple cat, whoever wanted to grab the purple cat would pick it up and say, purple cat, what do you see? And, you know, you can they won't do it immediately at first, but it kind of almost becomes a fun, dramatic play activity.
So as far as getting them involved, one thing that we did, we spent a little over 10 years doing family childcare. And so it's a mixed age group. We would have kids 3.5, 4 years old. A lot of times they would start memorizing books. So they're not really reading them yet, but they know,
They know the
literally
words.
memorize the book. And so they would do story time for the younger kids. And I'd have 4-year-olds sitting down with 3 or 4 2-year-olds around them in a circle, reading them the book and holding it up and doing the pictures. And that is so empowering for that older child and reinforces what they're doing. And it really is a great experience for those younger ones, I think, as well, because it's a near peer that's reading to them.
Yeah, once again, it's just another way to show them that reading is important and fun to do. And it's giving them the chance to really be the teacher in that setting. And that's very empowering. And it makes them want to continue to do it. And actually, as they get a little bit older, actually learn how to read the words and not just memorize the story.
So what happens when you're doing a group story time and things just go horribly, horribly wrong?
You stop doing the story time. And that's okay. And that's okay. I have done that in a room with 50 plus children and their caregivers. There are days that they're just not interested, and you stop doing the story. It's no big deal. I mean, you can do some tips and tricks. Maybe you stop the book and you turn on their favorite movement song. Or maybe at that point you say, you know what, let's take a break. Let's pass out the shakers or the scarves and let's do a rhyme. Let's play a game. And if they come back down, then maybe you keep going with the story. Or maybe you just realize it's not actually a very good book for this group of kids. You toss it and you move on with your day.
And it's okay to do that. Did you, in your childcare experience before you went to the library, did you have a set time in the schedule for story time, or was it kind of a pop-up thing, or was it a combination, or how did that, I mean, just logistically, how did it work, and what do you think works best?
It was a combination. I mean, there would always be that child that, while they were just playing in the room, would bring a book over and we would start an impromptu story time that others joined. I came from a center where we did have to have, it wasn't a fixed schedule necessarily like you did this at this time, but you did have to kind of show that you had a general plan and flow for the day. So I would usually try to begin a story in the morning. A lot of times when we were coming in from outside and just, no one was really too involved in their own project at that time. That might be those transition times might be a good time to bring them together and try a group story time, especially if you're doing one where you want to try, maybe you have a flannel board and you want to do a nursery rhyme activity with your flannel board. I would say try to do it times during the day where you're not disrupting what the kids are doing, because you're not going to have a happy group of participants if you make them put away whatever they were working on and force them to come sit on the carpet with you. But I think it's okay to have a mix. We always did a story before our quiet time, just as a kind of a way after lunch to, help their little bodies settle down before we lay down, or just had some quiet time in the room. I think if you have to be cognizant of how long your story times are lasting. And if you're trying to do something for 30 minutes, your kids are going to lose their interest very quickly. So, I would say, if you've got toddlers, your story time is probably going to be 5 minutes, maybe 10 if you're lucky. If you've got 4 and 5 and 6-year-olds, you could probably, especially if you, I kind of think of it as a roller coaster. If you do something that is high energy and then low energy and high energy and low energy, you can probably spread it out for a while. Just for an example, sometimes, we would start with a song and then we would read a book, and then we'd pull out the shakers or the parachute, and we would do a movement activity, and then maybe we'd read another book, or maybe we wouldn't. You just go with the flow of your class, but don't try to make it last longer than they naturally want it to last, or you're just going to be fighting with them the whole time. And I'm sure all of you know that already, because I'm sure everyone's seen it in their classroom on a daily basis.
So what about the lap situation? Because if you got, I don't know, 12 kids and 8 of them want to sit on your lap during the story, how do you make that work? Is it, and the whole holding the book up and reading it at the same time? What are the secret librarian tips for things like that?
Well, you can usually fit 1 or 2 on your lap. Sometimes if you are trying to hold the book up and you have a friend who really does not want to sit and listen, once again, I argue that's okay, but maybe you try to have that person be the book holder. Oh, I really need your help. Can you come over here? Can you help me? Can you hold this side and help me turn the pages? That's one way to engage them. If I've got a smaller group, like when I was with my classroom of, 8 to 10 students, we didn't usually sit in a circle. I'd usually have 1 or 2 on my lap, and then I would have 2 more on each side of me. We'd almost be kind of like a little bundle. I could almost put my arms around them, and I'd have the story in the middle, and maybe the child on my lap was the one turning the pages. I often like to have sensory activities set up at a nearby table. So those kids that do want to move while I'm reading the story can go over there and, pound some Play-Doh. Or
wait a minute. You can be playing with Play-Doh and listening to this story at the same time?
It's amazing. Yes, you can.
So in an early learning classroom, you could actually do group story time while everybody was off doing their own thing if and you wanted to, huh?
You could. I mean, I think you need to not be mad when blocks are falling over.
Sure.
And things like that. But I mean, I think you could set up an environment where let's say you want some quiet time, but it's not nap time. You could set up where you've got lots of different quieter fine motor activities going on around the room, and everybody could be sitting doing their own thing while you're walking around reading a book. I've actually done that lots of times. Or sometimes, you can turn on some music, and I'm sure everybody's done the activity where you've got the music playing and the kids are drawing, and they're just kind of drawing while they listen to the music. You can do something similar where you are, reading, and they're just kind of drawing using colors that come to their mind as they're listening to the story. Don't make it a this is what you have to do activity, because then you're just going to have to be fighting the management of that. But it's an option. Like, you can kind of have a conversation about it. What color are you using? Oh, what's blue on this page? The sky. Oh, you were thinking about the sky. Oh, you want to draw a green sky? Okay, draw a green sky. But you can turn it into an art activity. Trying to think, gosh, what's another fun thing to do? There is a Dr. Seuss book, Bartholomew something and the Oobleck. And you can even have containers of oobleck, just cornstarch and water that they're playing with while you read that story. And you can kind of bring some science demonstrations into it that way. There's so many things you can do. Story time does not have to be sit on the carpet, look at this book.
So when the conversations start, and we're hoping that they do, because that's that practice at language, and questions come up that you don't know the answer to, what's the right way to respond to that?
Sounds like a good thing to write down and spend some time. Maybe you come back to it in a later on, and you find another book that explores it a little bit more. Now, a lot of times they don't care later on. So in those situations, what I might do is pull out my phone and stop the story and look up the thing they want to know more about and spend some time talking about it. Once again, you don't just have to read the book. You know, if the conversation takes you totally somewhere else, we'll spend some time. Say it's okay to say, I actually don't know. Let's find out together and spend some time researching that with them.
And I mean, that also demonstrates a positive use of that magical technology we're all walking around with as well.
Yeah.
It's for more than kitten videos, I guess, unless they were asking what's the cutest thing on the internet, in which case you'd have to pull up kitten videos.
Yeah. Exactly. I think that's a really good point. I have actually used, I mean, this is a library setting, so it's a little bit different, but I have actually used that opportunity to say, well, hey, let's check out this website. And that is a positive use of that technology, because there are some cool things that you can find out on the internet, that you can see on the internet, like when it comes to demonstrations of, maybe you're reading about how a machine works and it's a picture book. Well, the illustration can only show you so much. So maybe you pull up a video of different construction vehicles at work. Screen time isn't necessarily bad when you are using it to build that background knowledge in a way that you can't do with just a piece of paper.
Yeah. And I mean, that's in the world we're living in, that is part of modern literacy, knowing how to use that technology in those positive ways. So I think that's a real interesting way to do it. We're coming up on time here in a little bit, Josie, but I was wondering about kids creating their own stories and sharing those during group story times.
Well, that's the best.
Okay, well, that's a short conversation.
That is a short conversation. Yeah, that is a really fun thing to do. You know, when you've got a child that has spent their playtime writing a story, wow, how empowering is that then to the next time you are all meeting as a group, ask them, do you want to share your story? And let them be the author, let them be the illustrator, let them be the storyteller, and bring their friends in and let them tell their story and have conversations about it. And depending on the group, if I've got a child that's really passionate about a story, that might be a situation where I would say, oh, you know what, let's let them finish their story first before we move on, because otherwise then you're going to have a battle. But you know, I mean, that's a good learning experience in its own right if you want to go that direction, but giving the kids that platform and the chance to kind of be the creative boss of that situation, how cool is that? You've shown them that text is powerful and important and their voice matters. So I think that's a really good use of those group times.
And I mean, we always had materials available, and so kids would create their own, literally make their own books, either individually or as groups, and we would create opportunities for them to share them. And sometimes it would be somebody reading, I mean, this is somebody that literally doesn't know how to write yet, would be writing books, and it would be scribbles, but they would read them.
The words.
And they would read the same story every time, which is amazing to me, but that's part of this process. And so that was delightful. And then as they got a little bit older, they would, I mean, actual words would start appearing, and it was a great pre-writing, emergent kind of writing activity.
You can also do that as a whole group. You know, you've got one person who, sometimes with my class, when we were just kind of playing around with language, I would give them a story starter line. I would say, I walked outside and there was a lion. And then the next kid would say, and he ate me, because I mean, that's what a story about a lion's always going to become. But you know, you just keep going around the group and everybody gets to add on to it. And whenever this is happening, well, I'm pulling out a piece of paper and scribbling this all down as fast as I can, because that's some great documentation to share with your families later on.
Yeah. It's just, hey, look what we did. And it's just this very visceral, in the moment kind of experience. Speaking of families, group story time and early literacy and pre-literacy and all of this, there's a direct relation to families, of course. And what we're seeing here in the States, at least, is that because of the fact that everybody is spending time staring at their own screens, children aren't spending as much time engaged in conversation and having story time as at home as they did a generation or two ago. And I'm guessing, at least to some extent, that's happening in Australia as well. What can we do, just quick, Josie, to help be more supportive of parents in reading to their children?
Well, and this is where I am at an advantage as a librarian. That's kind of hard to do as a teacher, because when I'm doing story time, my interaction with the parents is almost as important as my interaction with the kids, because what I'm doing is teaching them how to do these things at home. And I think you can also do that as a classroom teacher. It's going to look a little bit different, but maybe you are, like I said, documenting these things. And however, I don't know, I mean, your portfolios, your email communication, however you're communicating with parents, you are including some of these tips and tricks that they can do at home. And that chart that I sent out would be an excellent thing to kind of talk parents through. Maybe you are, especially in this weird time of quarantine, maybe you are recording sample story times that you're sending out to your families, kind of showing them what this looks like. I think it also, though, does kind of bring home the importance of doing this as much as you can in the classroom, because they might not be getting it at home.
Yeah, yeah, and anything we can do to encourage parents to read. I mean, we had back in our program days, we'd have some parents that, I mean, they like to be the center of attention, and so they would stop by and somebody would hand them a book, and they would do their own version of story time. So I think if you have parents that are comfortable with that, inviting them in as guest readers is kind of a beneficial thing, because they get tired of staring at your mug all the time. So having somebody new and shiny is kind of a new experience.
I even did that with my 5th graders. I would have a parent come in every week to do a read aloud with the kids.
Yeah, and I think that builds up their confidence as readers and as story sharers, and I mean, some of them could use that little bit of a boost when you can give it to them.
Yeah. You can also do family literacy nights, where maybe the kids have written stories, so you bring your families together, and it's almost like a poetry jam session. You can kind of set up your own little coffee house, and you're reading stories together as a class, and then have lots of little cozy areas where the families can break off into small groups and read together. I mean, there's a lot you can do to promote literacy with your families. You just kind of, be creative, think outside the box, and find ways to do these sample story times so they can kind of see what it should look like at home too.
And I think it's, things like having a book sharing area where you've got books that can rotate home, because one of the reasons some kids aren't being read to at home is because there are no books at home. So if there are ways that you can be supportive of that. One last question before we wrap things up, Josie, what are your recommendations for the classroom book area, for your literacy area? Do you have any tips or ideas for that kind of space?
Well, I always just tried to make it as inviting as possible. This is a great area to have a few comfortable chairs to sit in. Don't put out prize books that you're going to be devastated if they get torn up, because they will get torn up. They will absolutely get torn up. Now, can you teach the kids how the proper way to handle a book? Sure. Are your books still going to get torn up? Yes, because hopefully that means they're well loved, or it means they've been a Frisbee one day and it happens. Don't put the public library books out there that you're going to have to pay a bunch of money if the kids tear out all the pages. There are lots of ways to get inexpensive books donated to your classroom. This is a great thrift store find. Yes, Jeff.
Some inexpensive books are, what's the technical word for it? Crap. There's a lot of children's books out there that aren't good good books.
Yeah.
And I would rather have programs put the prized books out so children are being exposed to good children's literature than to stock their book area with garbage. And there's a lot of, and what I'm talking about is the stuff that's tied to
commercial
movies and television shows and very commercial
your
stuff.
commercial books.
That is garbage, and I'd die on this hill.
I agree. Now, if a child brought in a Paw Patrol book and that was what they really wanted to share with the class that day, you gag all you want. You read that book because that is important to that child. But where I was going with this is you can get on eBay and you can buy lots of books, like 50 books, $50. And a lot of times these are good classic books. So by cheap, I don't mean crap. I mean, you can find good books cheap, but all I meant is don't be devastated if something happens. I mean, even books that, and I agree, Bradley, it is important to teach the importance of taking care of books, but even so, things happen. So just
when you're 2, it's just you can work really hard at being careful when you're 2, and careful is just kind of difficult. We always had a book hospital when books got ripped. We had the library, the magic library tape for fixing books. I don't and just would kind of patch things up as best we could. Yeah. So where are we at? I think it's about time to wrap this up, huh? Any final questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, issues?
Oh, Nicole brought up, in Australia, she said the post office often has book packs with good quality books in them.
Well,
so, that's cool.
I'll have to get to the Australia Post.
Just don't get us to send them over there because it'll cost thousands.
Yeah, it costs thousands.
I'm jealous because you guys have the best children's authors.
We do.
Nick Bland. You cannot get Nick Bland's books in America except for you can get the very Cranky Bear, but that's the only one. And that is without a doubt the most popular storytime book I do is The Very Cranky Bear.
We do have fabulous books here.
But you don't have any bears.
Yeah, I don't know. Some of the better ones, though, are like Wombat Stew.
Oh, I love Wombat Stew.
One of the best.
Oh, koalas. Koalas aren't bears. Got real bears. This has gotten totally off track. I guess it's time to wrap up. I popped a bunch of the links Josie has mentioned into the chat. I'm gonna put one more in there. That's the link to a growing collection of children's book recommendations that we're building at the Playvolution HQ website that Josie's helping with. And then I'll pop in the session evaluation for anybody who wants a certificate. And if you go and fill out the very short evaluation, it'll send you a certificate if you want one for they're pretty enough to frame, so they've got that going for them. And any questions or comments, you can reach out to me on the Playvolution HQ website or reach out through Inspired EC, and we can relay stuff back and forth to Josie. I think this is it's a real important topic, and I guess the takeaway is more books, lots of reading, lots of conversation. It's okay for kids to be up and moving around during story times. It's okay to stop the book in mid-book and come back to it later. Any other wrap-up things we should throw in here?
Can I leave you guys with a book recommendation of my new favorite picture book?
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to steal the screen again. Hold on, let me pull it up. Now, granted, I don't know if it is easily available in Australia, and I apologize if it is not, but if you can get your hands on this book, it is so fun. It is called Where's Baby? And this is a book, when I picked it up to share with my kids, or with the kids during story time, I really didn't think much of it. It's a very simple book. Daddy Fox is trying to find Baby Fox, and Baby Fox is always hiding right behind him. And, you know, he runs into all sorts of scary animals and silly situations. And baby, he's always like, "You're not my baby," to like the giant crocodile or whatever it is. And baby fox is always hiding right behind him. This was a crowd pleaser like I never imagined it would be, especially with that like the older threes and fours that are beginning to kind of pick up on the humor of the illustrations. They fell over laughing because they thought it was so funny that baby fox was always right behind dad and dad couldn't find him. So this is, if you can get a hold of this one, every child I've read it to has enjoyed it so far. So that's
Cool.
my book of the month.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for your time. I put a picture of an American bear into the chat. Koalas are cute, but pound for pound, we got the meanest bears on the planet. Thank you all for your time. Enjoy reading, enjoy your day, and have a great one. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.